hobby tours of Frightbox Accordion here, and I'm going to share with you my 3 biggest tips for blending your heavy guitar tracks together. Now, blending heavy guitars together can be a bitch, especially within technical mixes where there are a lot of layers happening. Now, after mixing metal on a daily basis for many, many years, I've found that it really comes down to 3 key components, and I'm going to share with you each of them right now. So tip number 1, do not be shy with your high and low pass filters. You gotta remember, there's only so much sonic real estate in your mix that your guitars can take up. I found that giving the majority of the space to your rhythm guitars and being a little more limiting to your lead guitar tracks really helps blend them together. Now, what I mean by this is just letting your rhythm guitars live more in the low end and high end along with the mid range so they can cover a greater amount, again, of sonic real estate, but your lead guitars, not so much low end, not so much top end. Now, this can be very tricky, especially when you're soloing your tracks. The reason why is if you solo your lead tracks and they sound thin and dull, it can be misleading. You might think that that can actually hurt your mix, but believe me, it really won't, and the listener won't even perceive your overdubs as being dull and thin. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna play back an audio sample and I'm gonna break down exactly how I'm using this technique in this particular case. Let's check it out. So as you can tell, there is a bunch of stuff going on within this mix. You have the heavy rhythm guitars chugging along in the background. There's a lead guitar that pops in. Then there's another lead guitar that pops in during the vocal section. And then there are harmonies happening all at the exact same time. Now, this can easily become a cluster if you're not careful with your EQing. So I'm gonna share with you my approach that works time and time and time again. So again, as I was previously mentioning, I prefer to leave the bulk of my sonic real estate to my rhythm guitars. So let's look at the EQ that's on my rhythm guitars. So right here are my rhythm guitars, left and right. They're both 5150s. They are being sent to this submix, and there's no EQ on the individual channels themselves, but I do have an EQ happening on the submix. And if you look here, it's nothing crazy, a little bit of lower mid pulled out, a little bit of upper mid pulled out, and I'm letting the guitars live in the low end as well as the high end. I have my high pass filter set to about 80 Hertz, and my low pass filter is set to about 12K. For rhythm guitars, that's a large amount of bandwidth. Now, some people prefer to filter their rhythm guitars even more heavily than this, where they'll high pass even higher and low pass even lower. But I find that if I'm working with a good guitar player in a good arrangement, I can get away with a minimal amount of EQ like I'm using in this example. So that's the EQ on my rhythm guitars, and like I said, I'm not filtering it heavily at all. But with that being said, those other lead guitars that pop in the mix later on, like this lead guitar here, and then the one that kicks in behind the vocals, as well as the lead harmonies that pop in and out as well, let's look at the EQ that I have on them. So that first lead guitar, let's take a look at the EQ. So as you can tell, I am not shy with the high and low pass filtering on my lead guitar. Everything below 225 Hertz, as well as everything above 6K is gone. And it is the exact same thing on my other lead guitar track, and very similar on the others as well. So with that being said, let's listen to what one of these lead guitar tracks sounds like in solo. Let's check it out. Again. So as you can tell, not very impressive, but in the context of the mix, let's check it out. And that's because remember, the bulk of our tone really comes from the rhythm guitars. The lead guitars are just hanging out in the mid range. And that's one of the important things to remember when it comes to mixing in general. It's called mixing for a reason. You're mixing elements together to create the overall picture. And what's interesting about this is even though the track sounds dull and thin on its own, is when you're listening in the context of the mix, you don't perceive it that way because of everything else that's happening around it. So again, keep in mind when you're EQing your lead guitars, you might have to be a little more extreme with your filtering than you think. Remember, I said extreme filtering with your low and high pass filters. That doesn't mean extreme EQ boosts and cuts. With low and high pass filters, you're simply just getting rid of the parts of the frequency spectrum that you don't need on those particular tracks. So this brings us to tip number 2, stereoifying specific tracks. What the hell do I mean by stereoifying? What I mean by this is taking a mono source and splitting it into stereo to help create a hole in the center of your stereo spectrum. Now I'm gonna play that same area of the mix back, and I want you to pay close attention to what's happening with the lead guitar while the vocalist is screaming. Let's check that out. So not only are the rhythm guitars chugging away in the background, but we have some crazy lead happening on top of the vocal part. Now it's sections of mixes like this that can be very challenging because it's hard to place everything when so much is happening at once. And I find one of the best ways to blend a mono source in a situation like this is to split it off in stereo. So the lead guitar we're gonna be working with is this particular track right here. This is the one that's happening while he's screaming. And as you can tell, it's just a mono lead guitar. There are some harmonies that happen on top of that, and the harmonies, it's very simple. I just panned them out a little. But again, the main lead that's happening when he's screaming is just a single mono performance. So like I said, I stereoify it. Very simple. This track is a mono track. It looks like it's stereo, but it's only in stereo now because I have a stereo delay placed on the track. But I'm not using this stereo delay as a delay effect per se, meaning like repeated delays. All I'm doing is adding a 20 millisecond delay to the right side. So again, I'm taking a mono source, placing a stereo delay on that mono source, and delaying the right side by 20 milliseconds. So if you listen to the track in solo, it's gonna have a stereo type of sound to it. Let's check it out. So as you can tell, when I bypass the plugin, the guitar pops back into the middle. But when I engage the plugin, all of a sudden it's split off to the sides. So why am I doing this? The reason why I'm doing this is I want to create a hole in the middle for the vocalist. Because you gotta remember, there's a lot going on in this section for the listener to pay attention to. Again, the drums are going crazy with the double bass, there's chugging happening, the vocalist is screaming, and there's shredding happening at the same time. If I were to just leave this guitar in mono, it would just be sitting on top of the vocalist. Actually, let's try that. I'm gonna play it back without the stereo delay on it, just so you can hear how then the guitar will end up conflicting with the vocals. Okay, so let's check that out. I'm just gonna bypass this plugin and I'm gonna play it back without the effect engaged. So on the first repetition, I had the plugin bypass, and then on the second repetition, I re-engaged the plugin and it made a world of a difference. Without that stereo delay, the guitar is just really conflicting with the vocal part. You really don't need anything fancy to pull this off. I'm just using a stock delay plugin within Pro Tools. And again, let me clarify, the delay is not being used as a delay effect per se, meaning repeats happening over and over again. It's just simply delaying the right side of the stereo spectrum by 20 milliseconds. And the way that we perceive that 20 millisecond difference between the left and right speaker when it's a mono source is we perceive it as width. And it again creates a hole in the middle for whatever's happening in the middle. Any stock stereo delay plugin within your DAW will accomplish this just fine. Okay, tip number 3, utilizing simple volume automation in order to make room for your multiple guitar tracks. Now, time and time again, people will send me their mixes, especially when they're having trouble blending specific elements together, usually the guitars, and they'll ask for my input on how they can improve in this department. Now, the one thing we love to do as audio engineers is overcomplicate things. It's much more fun to talk about shiny toys like fancy plugins and outboard gear than it is to talk about automation. But here's one of the biggest secrets of the pros. A huge amount of the clarity that they create within their mixes is really due to simple volume automation. And one of my favorite examples of this is how to treat guitars during guitar solo sections. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play a little before the guitar solo, and then I'm gonna let the guitar solo play throughout. I'm gonna explain exactly what I'm doing in order to achieve clarity throughout this section of the song. Let's check it out. One of the most challenging aspects of a busy metal mix like this is getting the guitars to not step on each other's toes. And when you think about it, when a guitar solo is happening, you really want the listener to be drawn to the guitar solo, not so much the rhythm guitars. Now, if you think about this, it's actually pretty simple. Most people would do something crazy like take an EQ and boost the living crap out of a specific frequency in order to help the lead guitar stand out against the rhythm guitars. But in reality, you really don't have to make it that complicated. All you really have to do is just attenuate the volume of your rhythm guitars when the guitar solo is happening. I learned this in my internship. It's something I had never thought about before seeing a professional actually do it. And after I witnessed it, I wondered to myself, how could I have never thought of that in the past? It's so obvious when you really think about it. So if we take a look here, as soon as the guitar solo kicks in, I'm lowering my guitar submix by about 1.5 dB. Okay, so here's my guitar solo. And what I've done is as soon as the guitar solo kicks in, I've written in some automation to attenuate my guitar submix, my rhythm guitar submix, by about 1.5 dB. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna play the track back and let's pay close attention to my rhythm guitar submix once the lead guitar kicks in. Let's check that out. Again, let's take a look at the fader level here. So as you can tell, the rhythm guitar submix dropped by about 1 dB when the lead guitar kicked in. But the cool thing is, it's not even noticeable within the mix. All of a sudden, the lead guitar kicks in and your attention is drawn to the lead guitar. So again, this is such a simple tip, but it's something that many people neglect to do. Automation is something that people don't really like to talk about because it's not sexy and it's not exciting. But again, it really is one of the biggest secrets of the pros. So the moral of the story with this is do not neglect volume automation. So when you want to make space for your extra guitar tracks, remember, automation is one of the most powerful tools in your mixing toolkit. So what I want you to do is put these 3 tips into action in your next mix, and I want you to let me know of your results. Also, if you're using some of these techniques, let me know as well. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I would love to hear about it. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. You can both like and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Links are in the description below. If you dug the guitar tone in the video, be sure to download the exact same guitar cab impulse response that I used. There's a link below, right within this video's description. Till next time, happy mixing.